You know what? Let's talk about letters of recommendation today to make sure everybody feels confident about what you're doing. Because a letter of recommendation is like a formal business letter that is given to either a college or an employer, and it's part of the college application process. And in this letter, the recommender writes about the character qualities or the abilities of the person that is applying for that college or that job. So the best recommender is going to be written by an adult who knows your child well and can write well, or at least competently, preferably not from a parent. But there are times when you might be required to write a letter of recommendation from your child. So they can be written by a community college instructor or an employer if your teenager has a job. It could be written by supervisors for an apprenticeship or an internship. It could be when you ask for something with your job or your neighbor or someone, another adult in your co op or a friend from church. A glowing recommendation is somebody who knows the student by name and can comment on their work ethic and their character and their background. A letter of recommendation can be great outside documentation that what you say in your transcripts and course descriptions is actually what other people are saying as well. So, letters of recommendation are usually written by people outside the home. And the letter of recommendation has to be sent to either the college or the employer in a timely way. And people who write letters of recommendation have various degrees of discomfort with writing, and it can take them a significant amount of time, whether they've never written one before or whether they have lots and lots of people asking them. So it's really important to stay organized and on top of things and ask for a letter of recommendation early on. When you ask for it, you want to ask in a way where they can decline if they're not able to write it, either a glowing recommendation or they don't have time to write it at all. Now, there are some times when a parent will need to write a letter of recommendation. And there's times when the recommender needs some instruction too, because they haven't written one before. Maybe it's a friend from co-op or a teacher who is tutoring just your student, and they may not have written a letter of recommendation before. So it's really helpful for you to learn more about letters of recommendation so that you can be ready for that. So I think probably the most important thing is to ask the recommender, hopefully a month or two prior to the deadline, because it can take a while for them to think it through. What are they going to say? How do they write it? They're frantically Googling, trying to figure out how do they write a letter of recommendation. And then it takes a while for them to upload it or email it or snail mail it to get to where it has to go. Planning ahead for a letter of recommendation, that means that you're finding some high school activities that your student finds fun. If they have a activity or a class that they really enjoy, that's how you're going to get those glowing recommendations. If your child is doing something that they don't like, it's probably not going to get a glowing recommendation. So helping your child to find interests and activities outside the home, helping them to develop some sort of relationship with professors or the adults that are leading the group, or instructors, or others that have leadership positions. So a great recommendation really comes from two different sources. The first is an expert, like a teacher or tutor or college professor, somebody who can talk about the student's educational preparation. Here's how qualified they are in an educational way. If you're planning to do some dual enrollment when your child is in high school, that can be a great source of letters of recommendation. You want to plan ahead then, make sure your child knows how do they get to know the professor well so that they know them by face and by name. Well, you do that by sitting in the front row, asking questions, visiting during office hours, basically participating in the class so that the professor actually knows the student. The second kind of recommendation is more of a character recommendation, and that's from somebody who can speak to the student's character, knows their heart. Maybe it's from a pastor or a team leader, and they may not know all of the details of your home education, but at least they can speak to the personal characteristics of your child. So think about this for a moment. If your child were in public school, what would they do? How would they get a letter of recommendation? Well, often they would get one of them from the guidance counselor. And guidance counselors tend to not know the students at the high school unless that student is either honor roll or gets in trouble a lot. And the kids in the middle don't really see the guidance counselor. So when a guidance counselor has to write a letter of recommendation for someone, the first thing that they do is they look up their transcript and see what classes did they take. And then the next thing they'll do is they'll ask the student for a resume or activity list or reading list or something. So when your child is asking for a letter of recommendation, they can do the same thing. They can go to that recommender and say, here is my homeschool transcript. Here are my homeschool course descriptions. Here's my activity list and my reading list and the things that I enjoy doing. All of those things I'm hoping that you'll be creating anyway as part of your homeschool record. But by giving it to the recommender, they will know inside information about your child. So, for example, the person that wrote one of my children's letters of recommendation was a friend from church. He knew that we homeschooled. He'd talked to my kids lots about science and economics and everything. But he was pretty astounded when he saw their course descriptions and transcripts because he knew that they were, smart, but he didn't know these other things about them. Oh, you took Latin. That's very interesting, And so he was able to talk with them about that and write a more specific letter of recommendation. So the teenager is actually the one who asks for someone to write the letter of recommendation. They should request that in person and then provide additional details as needed by email too, especially if they have to upload it. And so that's the most important part, I think, of letters of recommendation. It definitely needs to be from the teenager, not from the parent. The teenager does the requesting, the teenager does the follow-up. The student sends a thank you note after the letter of recommendation has been sent. And all of this should be done in person if possible and not by email unless necessary. So when your student is asking for a letter of recommendation, you're trying to do it in such a way that the person, the recommender, can decline if for any reason they can't write a fantastic letter of recommendation. You want only people that are going to write something fantastic to be the one that are writing it. So then the student might say something like, would you be able to write a positive recommendation for my college application this month? That leaves them the opportunity to say, oh, darn, I am so busy this month, I won't be able to get to it right away. And then you'll know that's not the person for you. Or they'll say, oh, yes, I'll get that to you by the end of the week. And that way you'll know it's going to be a glowing recommendation. Be very considerate of the recommender's time. It's very important to ask them early on in the process. If you're asking them, 2 days before it's due or 1 day before it's due, that's actually a mark against the student that shows that the student wasn't organized enough to ask for it. in time. Make sure that you give the recommender all of the details that they need. Often they may need just the full name and the name of the school and the mailing address. But other times they have to upload it to the college or email it to a specific person. And if that's the case, you want to make sure that they have all of the information that they need. So you give that to them once they've agreed to write the letter of recommendation. Include any instructions in addition. Now, one thing is when you're asking for a letter of recommendation, it is considered very bad form if you see the recommendation yourself. It should be sent blind from the recommender to the college or employer, and you don't see it in between. That's one of the reasons why you want to make sure it's going to be a glowing recommendation and why you want to make sure that they can write well. So you don't want it to be filled with typos. So try to not see that letter of recommendation. Usually the college will ask you, did you see it? And if you did see it in advance, that's considered a bad thing. Now, occasionally a college will have a specific way for you to mail the letter. If it is going to be mailed, then it's considered good form to give the recommender an addressed envelope that is already stamped. They shouldn't have to go hunting for an address or hunt for a stamp if it has to be mailed. Now, obviously, it's preferable for all recommendations to come from non-relatives, not mom, not dad, not someone else. But there are times when a college will absolutely require a letter of recommendation from the school guidance counselor. And if you're homeschooling, that is you. So if you have been tagged for that position, then you're the one that has to write the letter of recommendation. So there are some keys for you to think about if that's you. The letter of recommendation is a very formal letter. So it should have a very formal format to that letter. It should look like a business letter from the distance. It should also clearly recommend, because it's called a letter of recommendation, so that they can gauge how much does the recommender recommend the student. And so, you basically have 4 options. I strongly recommend. I recommend, which means I kind of recommend. You could say I recommend with reservations, like, well, yeah, but there's this one thing. Or it could be I do not recommend. Okay. You definitely want all recommenders and your own letter of recommendation, if you have to write it, to say I strongly recommend. That means that you are extremely confident in the student's success and their ability to continue to be successful. So that's what in business, they call that the clear call to action. That means you have this conclusion, I strongly recommend. But that's not the only thing that the letter says. It's a letter of multiple paragraphs. So what you want to be doing is to brainstorm the character qualities of your student. Think about specific examples for each of those character qualities, and then consider and collect some key phrases that describe your child, and then brainstorm some additional strong words that you can use for your conclusion. This formal letter is written as the high school guidance counselor. And if you are homeschooling, you are the high school guidance counselor. But any high school guidance counselor will only know what happened between grades 9 and 12. This formal letter should never be used to mention anything that happened in elementary school or junior high. Don't mention anything that happened before 9th grade. It is only for the high school years. It also is about high school and this particular student. So it does not include any personal matters. It does not mention your family situation or divorce or any moves. It is only about the student, never about their siblings. It is written from a professional opinion of a high school student and their academics. So when a parent is writing the letter of recommendation, it's important not to sound like mommy or daddy, right? You don't talk about your child's annoying habits or their eye rolling or their weaknesses or your frustrations. Instead, you brainstorm enough strengths to fill the entire letter. You don't talk about the other children. You certainly don't talk about how overwhelming or difficult it was to homeschool. This is not a letter about you. It's not even a letter about homeschooling. This is a letter that is about your child who is nearly adult, who is trying to get the best possible college admission, scholarships, job application that they could possibly get. And providing a great letter of recommendation is a key to that, especially now as colleges are becoming more test optional. What do they use instead? One of the big things that they use is the letter of recommendation. So again, you want it to come from someone who knows the child well, writes well, and is not a relative. But if the college requests that you as the guidance counselor write a letter of recommendation, that's what I recommend that you do. And you make sure that you know how to write one that is professional and gives all the details that are required, including a fantastic recommendation saying, I strongly recommend this student to the college. Well, I hope that's been helpful to you. I know that these pieces of paper that we are producing, the transcript, the course descriptions, the letter of recommendation, the school profile, all of these can be very stressful and bring out a lot of emotion in parents. I just want you to know that if you'd like some help with that, if you join the comprehensive record solution, I'm more than happy to give you some examples that you can use, some suggestions, words that you can include, phrases that might describe your child. Having the paperwork behind your homeschool, it really explains the gravitas of your homeschool and can really earn some fantastic scholarships, hopefully allowing your child to graduate debt-free. That's my goal for each one of you. So I hope that that has been encouraging and helpful today, and you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.